Okay, so today we're going to kind of wrap up just a few little tidbits about Napoleon now that you've watched the video on him and stuff. You'll have to bear with me. My cold is just terrible and I sound really bad, but at least we'll get our notes done. So Napoleon, of course, is known as one of the best military leaders in all history. In fact, if you go to West Point, some of my students have gone there, you will still study Napoleon's strategy because he was a brilliant military man. Now, if you watch any cartoons about Napoleon, you'll notice probably two things about him. What are those things? Yep, that he is always portrayed as very short, and he's usually yelling or mad or something like that. Yeah, he's a tyrant. So let's take a look at what really is going on with Napoleon. Now, first of all, his nickname was the Little General, and that's why we see in cartoons they portray him as this 3 foot tall something or other. Well, actually, he was 5'6", believe it or not. Now, who's in here that's 5'6"? Okay, so could you stand up for us? Give us an idea of how tall it would be. Now, guys, what do you think? In today's standards, would that be short? Yes, probably a little bit, especially for an adult male, right? But the thing that we have to remember is that over time, human beings have gotten bigger, stronger, and faster. So back in Napoleon's day, 5'6" was actually a very average size for a man. It was very normal. So the question becomes, thank you for that, you can sit down. Why then did he become famous as the Little General? Well, remember that back in this day, they didn't have CNN like we do today. They didn't see him visually. All that happened is these people would hear stories about Napoleon, about how he kicked this guy's butt over in this battle, and he kicked this country's butt over here. So they heard these feats, and it was kind of like the idea of Paul Bunyan. They expected him to be as tall and big as Paul Bunyan. And then when they met him, they were almost disappointed because he was normal. He was average. So he became known as the Little General because they expected him to be as big as his military feats were. And he wasn't like the Rock, you know, he was normal size. If you'll take a look at this painting here, there's a couple of things that I'd like to point out to you. First of all, notice who is being crowned in this painting. Yep, this is Josephine, his wife. And remember, it's one of the greatest love stories, dramas in world history. Between the two, you saw how they cheated on each other and all that stuff. This painting is still up at Versailles Palace, and it is probably, oh gosh, almost as wide as my front wall, and it's about 2 stories tall. It's a huge painting. Well, the first thing I want to show you is, if you'll see here, ladies in waiting over here, you'll see that they're all painted in lavender, except for this one right here, the second girl. You'll notice she's in different color. And the reason why is the question. Well, first of all, the painter ran out of the color lavender. So who should I choose to be different? Well, it just so happened that this painter was in love with that particular girl. So he chose to paint her a different color so that she would stand out among the rest for all history. Another thing that's kind of interesting, if you'll take a look at the people in that box, obviously by looking at it, you can tell this is someone of prominence because they have a really good view of the crowning. This is supposed to be Josephine's mother. And if you remember, Josephine was from a little island nearby. And so it shows her watching her daughter being crowned queen. Well, the truth of the matter was that Josephine's mother was not there. That they didn't think it was appropriate that her mother didn't attend this event. So they asked the painter to paint her in the picture for all eternity so people would think that she was there. But they are lying. Can you imagine? This is a pretty famous painting of Napoleon wearing his laurel leaf crown and being all regal. If you remember from the movie, you remember that he crowned himself. Now, who normally crowned the King of France? Yep, you got it. The Catholic Church. So what kind of statement is he making when he crowns himself? Exactly. He is trying to show that he is above everybody. Including the Catholic Church. Remember that this is the country that actually had cardinals ruling for our kings when they were little boys. Like Louis XIII and XIV, the cardinals ruled for them and advised them. Well, no more of that. Napoleon put a stop to that. So he's putting the Catholic Church in its place. If you go to visit Paris, one of the biggest events, you must go see the Arc de Triomphe. It is a huge arc, and you'll notice if you look up top on this picture, these are actually people standing up there. So it is much larger than you realize in pictures. It was actually built for Napoleon's army. He called it the Grande Armee. I'm terrible at French, which means the Great Army, because he saw his army as one of the best. And he's right. They were one of the best trained armies of that time. So he called home and he said, I want an arc that our people can march through when we march home from our battles. And he did that 3 times. There are actually 3 arches in Paris, and if you look from up above, they're lined up. And so when they came into town, they would have a big parade, and they would march through these beautiful pieces of work. Now, if you look at the front of these, you'll see that there are sculptures inside those, and those represent all famous battles or things that Napoleon and his army did. So it is a celebration of his men. And if you go right down here underneath the ark, this is what you'll find. You'll find the tomb of the unknown soldier. We have one in the United States. Does anybody know where it's located? Yep, in Washington, D.C. In what cemetery? Arlington is correct. Arlington Cemetery. Now, with our Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, it represents any soldiers from any war that either we couldn't find body parts or the body parts were unidentifiable. It represents all of those people. In this case, it represents World War I. You'll notice the years are from World War I. It also includes an eternal flame that burns at all times. And then, of course, soldiers are guarding this, and it's really a neat thing to see. Just like going to see our Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is really unique. Now, if you look at this picture, notice, first of all, how tall the ark is compared to the buildings around it. You see this? Those buildings around there are at least 4 or 5 stories tall. So that tells you how big this thing really is. Notice where it's located. Yep, it is located right smack dab in the center of Paris, especially in that day. This was like the center of town. So you'll notice that they have hubs of about, 6 or 7 streets going out, right? Now, I found out some interesting things about this ark. The first thing that you need to know is that there is a roundabout around this place, and it looks something like this. If you've ever seen movies, European Vacation maybe, or something like that, your street's going a roundabout so that you can get to the other roads. So you would maybe go on here, for example, and you go in and come around, and you keep going around until you get out to your exit. Now that seems really easy, except when all of those roads are packed with cars, and then trying to get from lane to lane can be very difficult. Well, there's something that a lot of tourists don't realize, and that is that if I end up coming out of the subway over here, and you have these streets, that you don't walk across all those lanes of traffic to get to the Arc de Triomphe, that you actually take a tunnel that goes underground, and then you come up right here with the ark. So you will see Americans. You can ask Melanie Sittig about her husband doing this on our trip. He was basically playing Frogger, hopping across these lanes and trying not to get hit by traffic. Because of the tourists and all this craziness, there is a special law in this part of town. This is the only place in Paris, France, where your insurance does not cover you in your car. Because they basically say if you are stupid enough to actually drive in that roundabout, then we're not going to pay for any accidents that you get into. Because I guarantee you they have at least 2 or 3 accidents there a day, I swear. Bumper problems, all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of a crazy place to visit. So let's talk about Josephine, his wife, a little bit. Kind of interesting. Most of the time, kings would not marry someone who had been married to somebody else because they wanted someone that was pure. Well, in this case, Napoleon, remember, is not a noble. He's a normal person like us. He ends up marrying this woman who is supposedly one of the hottest girls of her day. She really was. She was a catch. She was married previously, and her first husband was actually beheaded during the French Revolution. She even already had 2 children out of marriage with Napoleon. And he basically took those kids in as his own. And from what we can tell from his letters, he was just head over heels in love with her. Her, maybe not quite so much. We know that she loved the status of being married to Napoleon. She loved going to the parties and having the clothing and all of that. And their letters are really famous, back and forth, because he was probably off at war at least 3/4 of their marriage, so they wrote back and forth. Now, if you remember in the movie, she was kind of famous for having affairs on her husband. While he was off at war, he basically writes a letter saying, "How dare you sleep around on me, blah, blah, blah." And if you remember, what happened to those letters? Yes, they were intercepted by the British Navy. Because remember, we don't have airfare or airports, right? Or planes. So they would actually send their mail by sea. And this Navy ship stops one of the French ships, and they actually capture all these letters, and they find this letter of Napoleon, like, wah, crying to his wife, "How dare you sleep around on me?" And it gets published in the newspaper in England. Talk about like total shame, embarrassment. He looks like he's some whipped puppy, and it's really bad for him. The sad part about this is they kind of work things out even after the affairs. Now, I want to make very clear to you, yes, she had affairs on him, but this man was gone all the time. He had wars with about every country around him. So do you think while he was away for a year at a time that he was loyal to her? Chances are he probably was not. Remember, this is Napoleon, who controls a chunk of Europe. He could probably have any girl that he wanted, and most likely he was sleeping around on her too. But back then, ladies, we didn't have any rights, so it didn't matter if the guy slept around on you. So I just don't want her to take all the heat for this, because it was a two-way street. They do work out their infidelity, but eventually he divorces her. And if you remember, why did he divorce her? Because she couldn't have children anymore. In fact, he said, "I want to marry a womb. I want to marry a girl that is young enough that can have children." So he divorced her to have more children. He then married Marie Louise of Austria. Now, you know me, I'm always trying to find dirt to make things interesting and stuff. Truth is, I really didn't find much about her that was unique, other than while she was queen and married to Napoleon, he actually declared war with her home country of Austria. So can you imagine Christmas dinner with the in-laws when he's actually attacking their country? I'm sure that didn't go over very well, as you can imagine. So now I'm going to give you some facts about Napoleon, good and bad, and I want you to decide whether you think he was a good leader or a bad leader. Did he do what was needed, or did he go too far? If you look in the corner here, just a little extra tidbit for you. These little coins are known as Napoleon gold, or Napoleons, because they used these when he was in power. If you find one of those nowadays, they would be worth something for sure. So let's take a look at some of the things he did. He went from being a leader of the French Revolution to becoming King of France. He took over to give people freedom. And he really did in some ways. Let's look at some examples. He did encourage higher education. Remember his lycees system, which said that all people could be educated, right? He created a better tax system that was fair for all classes. He created a central banking system to help kind of help out the currency of the country. He passed law codes to make the laws the same in all of the regions of France. And he even improved road and sewer systems so that our cities didn't smell quite so bad and that you could drive pretty easily to visit your relatives. Remember, he's famous for the Civil Code, and it's named after him, also known as the Napoleonic Code. He took laws that were different in all these different provinces and made them unified, which influenced the world. Now, with this code, it granted the middle class equality, obviously something good. He safeguarded their property rights. Remember, it's our job as a government to protect your property, correct? He abolished all privileges of birth. Now, think about why he passed that. Was he related to the Louis or any king in past French history? No, he wasn't. So basically, he did it because that made it okay for him to be the king, because he wasn't related to any royalty. He had state officials chosen by merit based on the lycée system, right? If they were educated, they would be chosen for that. But remember the bad part about that code? He gave men control over their wives. And if you remember, he basically said it was okay for a guy to sleep around on his wife, but if his wife slept around on him, then you could leave her, take everything, take the kids. So a little bit of his personal life involved there. Now let's look at some things that might be on the bad side. First of all, his goal was to be as powerful as Charlemagne. Remember the guy in charge of the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire? His goal was to be as powerful as that man. That was his role model. He's about freedom, but yet he seems an awful lot like a dictator. For example, he's going around and conquering all of Europe. He took his relatives and then placed them as leaders or kings and queens of the places he conquered. Why not let them rule themselves once you've taken over this area? He had the central government in control of the provinces, so his national government controlled everything. He started with free speech and press, but then in 1800, he stopped that because they started saying bad things about him, and he didn't like it. And he was ruthless in crushing opposition. He had a group of secret police. We'd call them like a goon squad. And if so-and-so here was talking against him, that person would disappear in the middle of the night and either be beaten senseless or completely disappear forever. They were known for assassinating people as well. So you didn't speak out against Napoleon. He started with a free election, but then he realized that he wasn't going to get elected because he wasn't as popular anymore, so he stopped free elections. And yet my question for you is this. Think about where he's come from. The French Revolution, the whole country was in chaos. We had 4 of you groups fighting for control, and you're killing each other. Things are a mess. So did he need to be that strong in order to keep control of a chaotic country? I don't know. At what point do you think did he go too far? Should he be allowed free press and free speech? Should he have killed his opposition? Maybe a bit too far? I don't know. You get to decide. Now let's talk a little bit about his military prowess. Before we do that, I got to just show you a little funny tidbit. Whenever I see this painting of Napoleon on his horse, I think about this because I learned this a lot of years ago in one of my classes. He actually suffered terribly from hemorrhoids. If you don't know what hemorrhoids are, sores in your butt, right? So he couldn't ride a horse for very long because it was very painful for him. So whenever I see him on a horse, I think about that stupid thing, but it's just kind of funny. Anyway, this kind of sums up his military philosophy. He, quote, said, "He who fears being conquered is sure of defeat. He who fears being conquered is sure of defeat." So let's think about what that means. Do any of you in here play football? All right. So tell me, guys, if you go into the game Friday night and you're worried about getting hurt, what's going to happen? You're going to get hurt. Well, why is that? What changes to make you more susceptible to getting hurt? Yeah, because you're worried about getting hurt, you go in maybe not quite as offensive, you hold back a little bit, and all of a sudden now you're not matching that guy hit for hit in an equal force. You're holding back, and so now they're pounding on you, and you end up getting hurt. Well, it's the same belief he had with the Army. If you're always thinking defense, you're going to get slaughtered. You've always got to be offense, offense, offense. And that's really what he used. He ruled from 1799 to 1815, and here are some of the new military tactics that you would study at West Point today. First of all, he did something that was against the rules. He went after retreating armies. So let's imagine that this side of the room and this side of the room are at battle. And you would fight, kind of like we did in the Civil War, but you would fight until you got tired, and then you would retreat to your little own areas. You would have supper around the campfire, and then you would come back and fight again another day. Well, he said, are you kidding me? When this group is down and they're retreating, we're going to let them go? That's where they're at their weakest. Why don't we go in for the kill when they're retreating? And that's what he did, and he won huge battles that way. He also had an army that was in better shape than any other army around Europe. Their army moved so fast, they sometimes marched 30 miles a day for a surprise attack. So imagine marching 30 miles and then not getting there and resting, but actually attacking when you got there. That was like something people hadn't seen before. So they were in great shape. They were awesome athletes. He also was known for a lot of casualties. For example, in just 2 battles against the Russians, they had 70,000 casualties. In fact, a Russian general said, "This isn't combat anymore, it's butchery." They weren't afraid to definitely inflict casualties. Now, there are some different theories for his death. We do know that by doing a little test on his body a few years ago in his hair, that he had arsenic in his hair. What do we know about arsenic? Yeah, it's poisonous, right? It's poison. So if you look at the symptoms, remember we don't have anything but the symptoms. We believe either he died of stomach cancer or he died of food poisoning. And either is probable. He definitely had enemies that didn't like him. He basically got booted out of office, if you remember from the movie. But on the other hand, he might have truly been suffering from stomach cancer too. Now let's take a look at Napoleon's territory. If you look at the sienna color, kind of this orangey color, this is all him. That is all Napoleon territory. So when you think about Charlemagne and the HRE, he probably achieved his goal, didn't he? During his time in office, these are all the countries he fought against. He fought against Italy, Egypt, Italy again, Portugal, Spain, Poland, Austria, Prussia, France, Sweden, and even Russia. And as you know, that was kind of the end of the hurrah. Imagine if all those people had unified against him. He had a lot of enemies, definitely. Now, you've seen this building before. If you remember, this is Les Invalides. an invalid, somebody that is not able to move, that is wounded. You remember that this building is a VA hospital today. It was actually built for Louis XIV soldiers as a VA hospital, and it is still used as such. Now, if you remember, this beautiful chapel on the backside with that golden top is what we're looking at in this particular set of notes. You'll see it here on this side, because this is where you can find Napoleon's body. His tomb is here. So if you look inside, you'll see you're on the main floor, and if you look above, you'll have this beautiful dome above you, and you'll see there's windows and gold. It's beautiful. It's well lit. And then if you look below you, because you're not allowed on the same level as Napoleon's body, you will see his tomb that rests right here. Now, there was no expense spared for Napoleon's body. If you remember, originally his body was on another place, another island. And then after a few years, the French realized, you know, Napoleon is kind of important to our history. I think we should move his body to France. So they did. But this body lies within 6 separate coffins, if you could imagine. One is made of iron, one's made of mahogany, 2 are made of lead, one's of ebony, and the outer red one that you see here is red porphyry, that beautiful red wood. The tomb sits on a green granite pedestal surrounded by 12 pillars of victory that you see out here. And I know it's hard to imagine because you're not standing there, but this tomb is as tall as probably the ceiling in this room. So it is huge. Now, why do you suppose they put his body in 6 separate coffins, like one within the other? Exactly. They want to protect that body so no one can get to it, and that body is safe and respected. And you will see that there are guards here, just like any other famous museum or site. In fact, the day that we were visiting there, they even had his famous general's coat that he's known for, and you see him in a lot of pictures. It was really something else, really neat to see. All right, that's it for Napoleon today.